I feel like the media tends to focus on those drivers who are heavily struggling in F1 momentarily, or they praise the unmatched talent like Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, and so on. And so today I want to be focusing on a driver who has gained popularity fairly recently and who might have not been evaluated fairly at times. A driver who showed how much he can be criticized on one day and be praised to heavens on the other. I'll try to be giving you a comprehensive look into Alex Albon's Formula 1 career, but before I get there, let's talk about his beginnings. Alex started karting at the age of 8 and he entered cadet class in 2006. He spent 6 years in karting before he moved to Epic Racing. During these years, he had his fair share of success, winning the Kartmasters British GP, Super 1 National Championship, KF Winter Series, amongst others. A side note that he triumphed in the CIK FIA European Championship ahead of Pierre Gasly and won the CIK FIA World Cup in the KF3 class, beating none other than Max Verstappen. He also had an impressive result in the WSK Euro Series, where he ended up second behind Max, but ahead of the likes of Leclerc, for example. By his own admission, Albon enjoyed his time in karting, as racing wasn't a need, it was an opportunity for him. Around 2011, Albon's financial situation changed due to personal reasons that I'm certain many of you have heard of, and I think that manifested in his racing career as well. It took Alex 3 years to get third in the Eurocup Formula Renault Series, when the likes of Leclerc were on pace almost immediately. Albon entered Formula 3 in 2015, racing with Signature at the time, who were admittedly not the best team on the grid for sure, so his 7th position in the championship was decent enough. The year after, he moved to GP3, where he ended up second behind ART teammate Charles Leclerc, but he beat a very well-known Dutchman. No, not him. He was actually racing with Red Bull at the time. Let that sink in. I meant Nick de Vries, who actually ended up 6th in the championship. In 2017, he continued with ART, albeit with less success. He finished 10th, whilst his teammate ended up 6th in the championship. 2018 was a much more successful year for Albon, who moved to race with Dams alongside the GOAT, Nicholas Latifi, who was in his 3rd year with the team, and whom Alex beat quite comfortably. He was actually the runner-up until the last weekend in Abu Dhabi, when an unfortunate stall killed his chances of winning the championship, and he actually dropped back behind Lando Norris, and he ended up 3rd in the championship eventually. At the end of 2018, it was clear that Mercedes junior driver George Russell will be moving to Williams, and that Lando Norris would continue with McLaren in F1 from 2019. But things were not as straightforward for Alex, who actually signed a contract with Formula E before a certain position opened up for him. That is when Danny Ric decided to ditch Red Bull completely. He moved to Renault, Gasly got promoted, and so there was a seat open at Toro Rosso. He did not have any previous testing experience with the team. He actually parted ways with Red Bull many years ago, but despite that, he was quite a match to Kvyat. On average, looking at their quali results, Alex had a tiny bit of an edge over Kvyat, which equals to about 1.5 tenths of a second. True, Kvyat collected more points than Albon did prior to his promotion to Red Bull, but Albon had his shining moments. He finished 9th in the Bahrain GP, recovered from the pit lane pretty nicely to 10th in China, and who can forget about Hockenheim, where he was in contention of the podium and was ahead of his teammate for a substantial part of the race, but unfortunately he dropped back at the end, only finishing 6th. To be fair, Red Bull didn't exactly have a queue of drivers lining up to replace Pierre Gasly mid-season, and it would have been highly uncharacteristic from the team to go for someone who they had previously let go. So they might as well gamble on a rookie who has coped with the unexpected quite well till that point. Now I want to make something clear here. I think that there has been a lot of discussions about that curse on the second Red Bull seat, and people are trying to compare Gasly, Perez, and Albon a lot, but it is really difficult to compare these drivers because they were racing at different years and different machineries. Well, that is except for 2019, because that is when the reliability of these comparisons is the best, given that Gasly and Albon were both racing in the same car essentially. Albon had a pretty impressive result right on his first race in Spa, where he started 17th because PU elements needed to be changed in his car, but he gained 12 positions and finished 5th. Later on, on in Russia, he started from the back completely, a little bit his fault. But again, he gained 15 positions, ended up 5th. And we have to mention Brazil, where he was on his way to grab his first ever podium finish when an incident happened and he unfortunately got 14th. After that. In terms of statistics, Gasly and Albon were both about half a second off of Max. However, when we look at the average race gap to Max, Albon was off by 3 positions, whilst Gasly was off by 5 positions in comparison. That is, again, on average. And on top of that, Albon collected 76 points during 9 races, while Gasly accumulated 63 points during 12 races. So I'm gonna be bold here and say Albon was the better choice to go with for 2020, objectively. However, the next year didn't really turn out the way that one might have hoped. It was a highly unusual season with 17 races, the race opener being in Austria in July. But Albon started pretty good, actually. Max was out of contention and he was in a very advantageous position strategically. He had fresh soft tires put on and he was about to overtake both Mercedes drivers and grab his first ever race win in F1. But then again, history repeated itself and that didn't happen. To give him credit, he finished 4th the race after, and he finished 5th in Hungary. Midway through the season, however, results started becoming a little sloppy. He finished 15th in Monza, where he had a collision, collected time penalty, and in contrast, his predecessor, Pierre Gasly, won the race. True, he got on the podium the race after, where almost half the grid was basically out of the race completely, and after, I don't know how many race restarts, he demonstrated a pretty good outside overtake and passed Ricciardo. Unfortunately, a series of bad results followed, namely in the Eiffel GP, where he DNF'd, and that is where he had that infamous radio message that lived a bit too long on the internet. Then he ended up 12th in Portimao and 15th in the Emilia-Romagna GP. To be fair, on the last race, he did what was expected of him. He helped Max strategically. He didn't allow Mercedes drivers to have a free pit stop. He actually almost caught up to Hamilton. But in a year where Max was 9 points off of Bottas, where Perez and Ricciardo ended ahead in the Drivers' Championship of Alex, the Abu Dhabi result came a little too late and he was demoted to a reserve and test driver role. During his year off, Albon raced in DTM alongside Liam Lawson while he was coaching Yuki and was working with the team to develop the car, and based on Max's own admissions, the RB17 was a lot more stable than its predecessor. Now, in order to explain why I think Albon might have not been fairly evaluated at times, I need to look into Perez's statistics a little bit. So Perez was about half a second off of Max in quali, perhaps a 10th better than Albon, but in terms of a quali position gap, he was 4 positions behind Max on average, and that was the same for Albon. And as we know, it was even better for Albon in 2019. Perez's average quali position was around 6th and Albon's around 7th in 2020. This was worse in 2019 for both Gasly and Albon, but that's understandable given that the Red Bull became second force from 2020 only. Race position gap to Max was 4.6 for Perez and 4 for Albon in 2020. That's, of course, disregarding DNFs. In contrast to that, Alex was about 3 positions off of Max on average in 2019. Average race position was 6 for Perez and 7.5 for Albon in 2020. This is something that Albon did better in 2019, despite him having the 3rd best car in the grid at the time, and obviously 2021 we know that Red Bull was 2nd and oftentimes even 1st. So what's the conclusion here? Was Perez better than Albon? I think he had a tiny bit of an edge over Albon in 2020, but I will also be blunt here and say the 2019 version of Albon would have kicked both Perez's ass and his own in 2020. Now, there's been an interesting podcast published by High Performance last year where Albon said something interesting. Apparently Max likes a sharp, sensitive front end to the car that not many drivers can adapt to with ease. Therefore, their confidence is already a bit lower at the beginning of the year, resulting in a couple of tenths of a second difference compared to their teammate. great. And as the season goes on, the car is developed to be edgier with increased sensitivity at the front end, which again increases the gap even further. That's why the likes of Perez may start off very well at the beginning of the season, but then start to fall behind a lot midway through. I mean, look at Perez's average quali gap to Max, for instance, in 2023. It was around 7/10, I think. But back to the story. Towards the latter half of the season, rumors started to swirl that George would move to Mercedes, so that opened up a whole new conversation. People were discussing who could replace him, maybe Nick de Vries, Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, Hülkenberg, Van Dorn. And so Albon wasn't really part of these early discussions, but later on he became one of the favorites. Well, not the favorite of Toto Wolff for sure, but that's a discussion for another day. Alex took his pals example and prepared his CV, his statistics, and presented it to Jos, but he knew that an Excel spreadsheet is far more superior to that of a PowerPoint, so I'm sure that that was the one convincing Jos to hire him for 2022. Now, to illustrate how good Alex's performance was in 22, I took a look at Russell's results in 2021. George Russell, not too shabby of a driver himself, had an average quali advantage of 0.31 seconds ahead of Latifi in 2021, whilst Alex had a whopping 6/10 of an advantage ahead of his teammate. In terms of quali position head-to-head, they both obliterated their teammate, with Russell having an average race position of 12.31, and that is including Spa and the fact that Williams were better in 21 than in 2022. So how did Alex gain an average position of 12.7 in a dead last car is almost beyond me. His shining moments included Australia, where he actually completed the entire race on the same set of tires, and in Emilia-Romagna, where he recovered to 11th from 18th. He may have only collected 4 points, but I don't think that the amount of points he collected truly represents what he did for the team that season. His average race position does, however. It showed that he was able to perform on a high level consistently, and so no wonder that his contract was extended beyond 2022. 2023 enters James Vowles, and Albon starts racing against rookie teammate Logan Sargeant. Including the sprint shootouts, Albon had a half a second advantage over teammate Logan Sargeant, and looking at their head-to-heads, he completely obliterated his teammate. Alex had an average race position of 11.11, which is damn impressive. He was ahead of everybody else in that mid to back marker pack, and on top of that, he was the sole reason for Williams' 7th place finish in the constructors, as he collected 27 points out of 28. His first outstanding result came in Canada, where he finished 7th as the head of the Albon train, holding 5 cars behind for about half the race. Then he continued, finishing 8th in the British GP, ahead of both Ferraris, and ended up 8th in Zandvoort as well, after qualifying 4th. He finished 7th in Monza and in the sprint race of Qatar. Then he collected 2 9th finishes in the US and in Mexico respectively. He qualified 5th in Las Vegas and ended up 13th in the championship, leading that backmarker pack by 10 points ahead of Tsunoda. It's safe to say that Alex's reputation has been turned around in the past 2 years, with Red Bull being allegedly interested in him. I really don't know what his future holds, and to be fair, I would like to see him next to an established driver just to really know how good he is against somebody who we know can perform at their absolute peak. But I think that there is one key takeaway from this video, and that is, no, you're not only as good as your last race.